The moment my son-in-law found the envelope, I watched his whole face change. We were sitting at my kitchen table in Kelowna, the last weekend of October, leaves outside already gone brown and curling at the edges. My daughter Fiona had made a pot of Earl Grey, and her husband Conrad was helping clear the birthday cake, my 68th, when he knocked my reading glasses off the counter, reaching for a dish towel. He bent to pick them up, and there it was. The letter from my financial advisor that I'd left sitting out like a fool. The letterhead alone was enough. Westwood Private Wealth Management. And underneath, in plain figures, the current portfolio balance. Conrad didn't say anything at first. He just stood there with my glasses in one hand and the letter in the other, reading it the way you read something you have to read twice to believe. "Dad," Fiona said from the sink, not yet understanding what had stopped him. "The glasses are just on." $7.4 million, Conrad said. Not a question. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet before something breaks. I took the letter from him and folded it once, carefully. "That's been building since your mother's parents passed," I said. "The business sale, the investments, it took a long time." "You never mentioned," Fiona said. She wasn't accusatory, not yet. She looked genuinely stunned. "It didn't come up." Conrad set his tea down. He was smiling now. A particular kind of smile I'd seen on him at car dealerships and at contractor quotes. A smile that meant he was already doing arithmetic. "Well," he said, "that's something, isn't it? That's really something, Walter." He called me Walter. He'd called me Walter from the day they got married 8 years ago, even after I'd quietly suggested Dad was fine. I'd let it go. I always let things go. That was the last evening I would do that. I lay awake that night in the house I'd lived in for 31 years, listening to the guest room above the kitchen. Fiona and Conrad thought I'd gone to bed an hour earlier. I hadn't. I was sitting in the dark in the armchair by the window with a glass of water I didn't drink, and their voices came down through the ceiling the way voices do in an old house where nothing is as insulated as it should be. "7 million, Fiona. 7 million, and he's living in that same house, driving that same truck. It's his money, Conrad. It's family money." His voice dropped, but I could still hear the edge in it. "We've been killing ourselves on the mortgage since interest rates went up. My parents can't help us. Your brother's useless. And your father's been sitting on $7 million letting us struggle. He doesn't know we're struggling. He does if he looks. I've told you we need a bigger place. Emma needs her own room. We're 40 minutes from decent schools, and the area's only going to get worse." A pause. "He's 68. What's he going to do with 7 million? Travel? Garden?" Conrad stopped. "I'm serious. We should ask him. Directly. He owes us that conversation." "He doesn't owe us anything." "He does. He's your father. That's what family does." A longer silence. Then Fiona's voice, softer, and I had to press my ear toward the wall to catch it. "Maybe you're right. Maybe if we just explain the situation, the mortgage, Emma's schooling. He'll help if we frame it right. Men like your father respond to legacy. Tell him it's for Emma's future, grandchildren, roots, the family name. He'll open up. Men like your father." I sat very still. "And if he doesn't?" Fiona asked. "Then we remind him that keeping secrets in a family has consequences. That we've supported him, been here for him since your mother died. That matters. That counts for something." I didn't sleep that night. I lay there until the sky went from black to the flat gray that comes before a Okanagan dawn, and I let myself remember every year that had led to this ceiling, this conversation, this feeling like cold water poured slowly down the back of my neck. My wife Patricia had died 6 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Fiona hadn't come for the first 2 weeks because of a work conference she said she couldn't leave. Conrad came to the funeral and left the reception early. I'd sat in the hospital those last nights alone, holding Patricia's hand, listening to machines, and I'd told myself that Fiona was grieving in her own way. I'd believed it, because believing it was easier than the alternative. After Patricia died, they'd needed help with the down payment on their place in West Kelowna. $40,000. I'd given it without hesitation, without paperwork, without so much as writing it down. When they redid the kitchen 2 years later, Conrad mentioned, casually, over dinner, that they were a bit short and a loan would mean the world. $18,000. I'd transferred it the next morning. There was the vehicle loan when Conrad's truck died. The dental bill when Fiona's insurance didn't cover what they thought it would. Just to get us through the month, money that came every few months, always with a reason, always reasonable sounding, always followed within weeks by photos on Fiona's Instagram of a weekend at a resort in Penticton or a new patio set on their deck. I was not an ATM with a name. I was a father who had confused generosity with love, and I had been very, very generous. Standing in my kitchen the next morning, watching Conrad pour coffee like he already owned the place, I understood something had shifted permanently inside me during the night. Not toward anger exactly, toward clarity. "Sleep well?" Conrad asked. "Fine," I said. "You?" "Great." He smiled. "Great place to sleep, this house. Lots of room for just one person." I made eggs. I didn't take the bait. "Over breakfast?" they asked. Fiona framed it the way Conrad had coached her. Emma's future. Roots, the right school district. They just needed a hand with a larger down payment to get into a better neighborhood. 50,000 would change everything, and Conrad sat beside her nodding with the careful expression of a man who has rehearsed patience. I listened to the whole thing. I asked a few questions. I said I'd think about it. They drove home that afternoon, and I stood in the driveway watching their SUV until it disappeared around the corner. And then I went inside and called my lawyer. 3 weeks of silence, and then the letter arrived. I was raking leaves along the side path when the courier pulled up. I signed, carried the envelope inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stood looking at it for a moment before I opened it. Application for representation order. It read across the top. British Columbia Supreme Court. My hands went still. They were applying to have me declared incapable of managing my own financial and personal affairs. The application cited, among other things, a sworn statement from Conrad's cousin, a man I had met exactly once at their wedding, claiming he had witnessed me becoming confused and disoriented in a parking lot in Penticton, a letter from a doctor, whose name I didn't recognize, asserting I had presented with signs of early cognitive decline during an office visit I had never attended. Statements from 2 neighbors I barely knew suggesting they had observed unusual and concerning behavior. The application also noted that, as a protective measure pending the court's determination, my primary checking and savings accounts, just over $400,000 combined, had been frozen. I sat down. I read it again. Then I read it a third time. They had not asked me for $50,000. They had asked to take everything. I called my lawyer, a woman named Beverly Ng who had handled Patricia's estate and who had the particular quality of never sounding alarmed by anything. I told her what I was looking at. "Don't touch anything financial until we talk in person," she said. "Can you be here tomorrow morning?" "I can be there in an hour." Beverly's office was on Bernard Avenue downtown, and she read through the documents in the kind of focused silence that made me understand why I had always trusted her. When she looked up, her expression was measured and precise. "The doctor on this affidavit," she said. "Miriam Schultz. She's a pediatric GP in Vernon. She is not a geriatric specialist. She is not a cognitive assessment clinician. Her credentials for opining on adult cognitive function are essentially nil." Beverly set the page down. "This is not a strong case, Robert. This is a desperate case built on forged affidavits. The question is how badly we want to answer it." "Completely," I said. She smiled. "Then let's start with a proper cognitive assessment. I know exactly who to call. Dr. Alain Tremblay at Colonna General put me through 4 hours of testing that I found genuinely almost enjoyable. Memory, spatial reasoning, mathematical function, pattern recognition, verbal fluency. When we finished, he looked over his results and told me my scores placed me in the 93rd percentile for men my age, and frankly, above average for men 20 years younger in several categories. He said he would be delighted to testify. Back at Beverly's office that afternoon, I laid out what I'd been carrying in a folder since the day after my birthday: 2 years of recorded phone calls with Fiona and Conrad. British Columbia is a one-party consent province. I had known this since the first time Conrad made an offhand comment about my finances and something cold moved through me. The recordings were not dramatic. They were ordinary. They were worse for being ordinary. Just two people, in the easy privacy of their own kitchen, talking about what they planned to take and how they planned to take it. Conrad's voice explaining that men my age become pliable when they're lonely. Fiona's voice, quieter but not absent, agreeing that a representation order would be cleaner than a long argument. Beverly listened to 3 of them, then set down her pen. "Robert, you have everything." We filed a response to the application by 5 o'clock, along with Dr. Tremblay's assessment, the audio files, and a detailed affidavit from me covering every financial transaction I had made on Fiona and Conrad's behalf over the past 8 years. Beverly also filed a formal complaint with the BC Law Society regarding the notarization of statements she had already identified as fraudulent, and a referral to the RCMP for elder financial abuse. Then I went home, cooked dinner, and began organizing what I had been building in a spreadsheet since the morning after my birthday. The spreadsheet was 52 rows long. Every transfer, every loan, just this once. I had receipts for most of them. I had bank records for all of them. Patricia used to say I kept records like a man who expected to be audited, and she meant it as a gentle tease. It turned out she was right, and it turned out I was grateful. The total, with interest calculated at the Bank of Canada's posted personal loan rate for each applicable year, was $289,000. I sat in my study for a long time looking at that number. Then Conrad posted on Facebook. I didn't see it immediately. My neighbor Teresa, a retired school principal who had lived 3 doors down for 20 years and who had brought me soup every week for a month after Patricia died, knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening looking uncomfortable in the way people look when they're delivering news they wish they didn't have. "I think you should see something," she said, and showed me her phone. Conrad had written a long post about elder financial abuse. Not his attempted financial abuse of me, the other kind, the kind he was performing. He described an aging widower who had accumulated significant wealth through inheritance while refusing to support his own daughter and grandchild. He posted a photo of Emma looking sad in what appeared to be the same winter coat she'd had for 2 years. He wrote about a system that allowed elderly people to hoard assets while young families struggled, and he tagged several local community groups and a Kelowna city councillor he apparently knew from a hockey league. The post had 312 shares by morning. My phone rang for 2 days. Some calls were sympathetic, some were not. The woman at the pharmacy where I'd been a customer for 15 years was careful and distant in a way she had never been before. A man from my curling club left a voicemail that simply said, "Saw the post, Walter. Hope you're doing all right. Not sure what to think." I documented every call. I screenshot the entire post and its comments before Conrad, apparently on legal advice, took it down on the 3rd day. By then, I had everything I needed. The Glenmore Community Association meeting had been scheduled for 2 weeks out. I had asked to be put on the agenda for 15 minutes under Community Matters. Conrad had separately requested time to speak about what he called a family situation affecting local residents. The meeting chair, a man named George who had run the association for 11 years and who I knew well enough to trust, told me privately he wasn't sure what he'd walked into. I arrived with a laptop, a printed folder for each board member, and Beverly on speakerphone ready to answer questions. Conrad and Fiona arrived 5 minutes after me. Conrad in a pressed shirt. Fiona looking like she hadn't slept. Conrad went first. He was good at this. Warm, measured, just emotional enough. He talked about family, about aging parents and the duty of care, about young people priced out of safe neighborhoods while wealth sat idle. He didn't use my name, but he didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew the story. When he finished, George turned to me. I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up the first slide, a table. Dates, amounts, purposes. 8 years of financial support, in columns. Conrad mentioned the duty of family, I said. I agree with him. These are my records of how I've fulfilled that duty over the past 8 years. The total is approximately $240,000 in direct transfers, loans, and gifts. The room was quiet. I moved to the next slide, a screenshot of Fiona's Instagram. A weekend in Penticton, tagged the same week they'd called to say they couldn't cover their mortgage without help. A new sectional sofa, a birthday party for Emma at a venue in downtown Kelowna that I recognized as expensive because I had once looked into renting it for Patricia's 60th. These were all posted publicly, I said. The dates correspond to periods when I was asked for emergency financial assistance. Someone near the back of the room said something under their breath. Teresa, sitting in the second row, pressed her lips together. I moved to the final document, the court filing. I didn't read the whole thing. I didn't need to. The summary was enough. Application to declare me financially incapable. Sworn statements from people who did not know me or had never met me. A doctor who had never treated me. I am not incapacitated, I said. I am 68 years old. I scored in the 93rd percentile on a full cognitive assessment 3 weeks ago. And I have the documentation to support everything you've seen tonight. What I am is a father who gave generously for 8 years and who drew a line when his family attempted fraud. The silence that followed was different from the silence at the beginning. Conrad was on his feet. Those records are selectively presented. You're leaving out context. Conrad. George's voice was quiet and final. Sit down. Fiona was staring at the table in front of her. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who had finally, at great cost, understood something. After the meeting, Teresa walked out with me into the cold November air. I owe you an apology, she said. I shared Conrad's post before I thought it through. You didn't know, I said. That was the point. 3 days later, the legal demand arrived at their house. Beverly had prepared it with the same efficient precision she brought to everything. The documented loans, the interest calculations, the formal demand for repayment within 60 days or the initiation of civil recovery proceedings. The RCMP had also been in contact. The fraudulent affidavits were not a small matter. Their lawyer called Beverly within the hour. She told me afterward they had described their clients as open to negotiation. I was not particularly open to negotiation. But I was open to a conversation with my daughter. She came alone, on a Saturday, 2 weeks after the meeting. Conrad did not come. I didn't ask why, and she didn't explain. She sat at my kitchen table, in the same chair she'd sat in as a teenager doing homework while I made dinner. And she looked older than she had at my birthday. Not older badly, older honestly. I don't know how much of it was him and how much was me, she said. I've been trying to figure that out. I know, I said. I don't think it matters as much as what you do next. The affidavit things, I didn't know how far he'd gone. The doctor, the neighbors, the parking lot story. I didn't know about those until Beverly's letter. I looked at her for a long moment. Did you know about the representation order application? She held my gaze. Yes. I nodded. It was the honest answer and it cost her something to give it. I need you to understand, I said, that what I built over 40 years is not a safety net for bad decisions. It is not a down payment on a bigger house. It belongs to me, and when I'm gone, I'll decide where it goes. But right now, today, I am still here. Fiona was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Are you going to pursue everything? The legal stuff, the full amount?" "I'm going to pursue accountability," I said. "Whether that means courts or a payment plan or something else depends on what happens next. Not just from you, from both of you." She nodded. She picked up her tea. She didn't try to argue or explain or make it smaller than it was. That was, I thought, a beginning. The winter came in properly after that. The kind of Okanagan winter that surprises people who think the valley is always mild. I spent a lot of it doing things I had put off for 6 years, a week in Quebec City with an old university friend, a woodworking course I'd looked at for years and never signed up for. Beverly closed the legal proceedings against the fraudulent affiants in March, with results I won't describe in detail, except to say the Conrad's cousin and the woman who called herself Dr. Schultz both found themselves facing consequences they had not adequately considered. Conrad and Fiona separated in February. I learned about it from Fiona, not from gossip, which told me something. She was in a small rental in Rutland, Emma in the room next to hers. She called every couple of weeks. The calls were short and careful and real in a way our conversations hadn't been in years. I set up an education trust for Emma in the spring, structured properly through Beverly's office, with conditions and a trustee and every protection my particular personality required. Fiona cried when I told her. I told her the trust was for Emma, not as a gesture toward her or away from Conrad, not as a reward or a punishment, just a grandfather doing what grandfathers are supposed to do when they can. One evening in April, I was in the garage working on a small cabinet I'd started in the woodworking course when Fiona dropped by with Emma unannounced. Emma was 7 and had recently decided she was interested in tools, which I found entirely agreeable. I gave her a piece of scrap maple and showed her how to sand with the grain. She was methodical about it in a way that reminded me, sharply and sweetly, of her grandmother. "Grandpa," Emma said, running her thumb along the wood, "why does it go smooth this way, but scratchy the other way?" I thought about how to explain the grain of wood to a 7-year-old and decided the real explanation was the right one. "Because everything has a direction it wants to go," I said. "If you work with it, it comes out right. If you work against it, you just make a mess." She considered this with the seriousness only children bring to things that are actually true. Fiona was leaning against the workbench watching us, and when I glanced at her she looked the way I remembered her looking as a small girl, before everything got complicated, just present, just there, just herself. Some things take the whole winter to come back, but they do come back if you give them the space and the time and the patience that good things require. I still think about that spreadsheet sometimes. 52 rows, 31 years in the same house, 40 years of careful living, and the clearest record I had of what I'd actually been doing with my love was a column of numbers that added up to $289,000 moving in one direction and almost nothing coming back. That's not bitterness. It took me a while to understand the difference, but what I feel now isn't bitterness. It's more like the feeling you get when you finally read the instructions for something you've been assembling wrong for years. A little embarrassed, mostly just relieved to finally know. What Conrad and Fiona did had consequences because actions do. Not in any mystical sense, not because the universe was keeping score. Just because the world is made of cause and effect, and when you build a life on a false story, the structure eventually shows the stress. Conrad told that story well. He was genuinely talented at it. But he built it on documents that didn't hold up, on a version of me that didn't exist, and when Beverly put my actual cognitive assessment results beside his affidavits, the whole thing just collapsed under its own weight. That's not punishment, that's physics. What I keep coming back to is the question of what I did wrong. Because I did do something wrong. I gave without asking for honesty in return. I confused being generous with being good. And they're not the same thing. Being good requires a kind of clear-sightedness that I was too comfortable to practice. I looked at what was happening with Conrad, with Fiona's drifting away from her own judgment, and I told myself it wasn't my place to say anything. That's not kindness. That's avoidance wearing kindness as a coat. The thing about building anything that lasts, a cabinet, a financial portfolio, a relationship with your daughter, is that it requires you to think carefully and honestly at every step. Not just once at the beginning, not just in the big moments, but in the small ones. When Conrad first called me Walter in a tone that meant something other than my name, that was a small moment. I let it pass. 36 small moments later, I was watching my daughter's voice on a recording agreeing that a legal intervention might be cleaner than a conversation. Those things are connected. I don't say that to blame myself for what they chose. They made their choices. But I made mine too. And for a long time my choice was to make everything soft, to absorb every friction so nobody had to feel it. The problem with that is you don't actually protect people that way. You just delay the education. What I'm proudest of, looking back, is not the legal strategy. Beverly was brilliant and I'm grateful. But the paperwork was just paperwork. What I'm proudest of is that I didn't give up on Fiona. I stayed clear about what had happened without turning it into something it wasn't. I kept the door at the right width, not all the way open, not closed. That took more steadiness than anything else in this story. Emma sanding that piece of maple, running her thumb along the grain to feel which way it wanted to go. I think about that a lot. 7 years old and she already understood in her hands, before she understood it in words, that working with the nature of something gets you further than forcing it. I couldn't have explained it better myself. Some things only teach you what they have to teach you after they've cost you enough to pay attention. I paid attention. That's the whole story, really.